Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Today we'll be discussing racial profiling, and joining us on the show is Nashashebi, an award-winning journalist and analyst on Arab affairs. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Do you think that the racial profiling for Arabs has increased over the years?
Yes, absolutely. I think since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the idea of racial profiling gained ground because Islam became the next bogeyman after the Soviet Union collapsed. That was the main common international enemy of the US and the West in general. That increased massively with the September 11 attacks, and now that has increased even more with the fight against ISIS. So all these different things have now basically, I think, they're unprecedented levels of racial profiling, because any Arab or Muslim is viewed inherently with suspicion simply by their race or their religion, and I think it's I don't think there is any justification for racial profiling, regardless of the security situation. People must be treated according to their behavior and their actions, not the color of their skin or whether they have a beard or whether they're of a certain religion or race. That's not a reason to suspect someone automatically.
But then with, like the current trend, especially in the UK, is mainly having a beard. So even like when I'm walking down the street and we usually tend to recognize an Arab, but sometimes now we can't really recognize if they're Arab or not due to the beard. So yeah. Do you think that people would also be stopped and searched just because of the beard?
Well, I think if someone who had darker skin had a beard, yeah. But if someone who is obviously very Caucasian looking had one, perhaps they still would, because now they might be seen as a convert, for example. But this is part of the ridiculousness of this idea that a couple of weeks facial hair growth makes you a radical or a Muslim extremist. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just facial hair, And again, my problem is that each country has a limited resource to tackle extremism. This is not a good use of its resources to target an entire community or different communities based either on skin color or facial hair or religion or race. You are throwing the net out so widely that with your limited resources, this is a very inefficient use of resources. If you focused only on people who acted or behaved suspiciously, then that's a much better use of those resources. You're more likely to catch the extremists that way than saying everyone from these communities must be held in suspicion. That doesn't work, and numerous studies have shown that racial profiling doesn't work. So I don't understand the logic in continuing a policy that has been shown to be ineffective.
But then in the UK, it's known for many years now to have the most amazing security resources, where it knows exactly what you and I do, where we go, etc. So from that, they know who we are in a way. So for them to stop and question, how is that actually helping?
Well, I think for them it's just easier to say, well, it's easier to just suspect people collectively rather than look for instance, a needle in a haystack, to use the term. So it's easier for them, and also it plays better electorally. If the government is seen, if they're seen as questioning loads of people rather than a few people, it's seen in the eyes of the public as the government doing more, even though it's not actually doing more. It's just questioning loads of people who have no connection to extremism. But it plays well in public. In airports, for instance, it assures people when they see lots of brown people being questioned or whatever, because something's being done about extremism. But it doesn't matter to them whether these people have anything to do with extremism. But it's more that the authorities want to be seen to be doing something.
But then that's racist.
Yes, well, there's racial profiling. It's in the name. It is racist. And extremism is not limited to race. So this is why, on a moral level and on a strategic level, it's ineffective.
Then how come this, act is still allowed when it's really racist? And
because the authorities never admit it takes place. They'll never come out and say we racially profile communities. They don't do that. The evidence is in the statistics. That when you see that only darker people or Muslims or Arabs are questioned and white people are not, and when you look at statistics and reports, that's when racial profiling as a policy comes out. But governments won't admit that it takes place because it's often illegal and unconstitutional. So that's the difficulty, is proving it and getting an admission from various authorities that they specifically target these communities.
But then if we're going to be looking at the current situation in Iraq and Syria and ISIS as a group, the majority who are actually in ISIS are converts. They're not actually, the Arab Muslims that are around. So how come they're, mainly stopping mainly the Arabs and the Muslims?
Well, this is another central point of the pointlessness of racial profiling, because it's not, the jihadist groups have long realized that it suits them to recruit more from communities that don't fit the racial stereotype, converts, Caucasians who convert, things like that. And racial profiling doesn't take that into account. They still have this very Hollywood set view of what Arabs and Muslims, or what extremists should look like. And then even within that, they have this idea that Arabs and Muslims all look the same, which is ridiculous. I mean, a Nigerian Muslim doesn't look anything like an Indonesian Muslim or an American Muslim. So it's a policy based on stereotypes that don't exist. There's not a homogeneous look for Muslims and Arabs, and then it doesn't take into account that jihadists are recruiting converts and people who don't fit the stereotype. So it's an outdated method, which never worked anyway, and is even less effective now. And then on top of that, we have as I was saying about not admitting that this policy takes place. Every time I'm pulled aside, I'm told that it's a random check, that it's just the luck of the draw that I got pulled aside. But every question that I'm asked is about my Middle Eastern background, is my travels to the Middle East. It's all to do with the Middle East. And yet I'm treated like an idiot because I'm supposed to believe that it was just random that I got pulled aside. It could have been anyone else. So it's an insult to injury that this policy takes place.
But then if you're stopped and questioned and you don't want to answer them, because it doesn't really concern them where you've been and what you've been doing, if you were not to cooperate with them and be like, it's none of your business?
No, you would probably be apprehended. I mean, there are terrorism laws. By not answering, you'd probably be deemed as.
So you have to answer.
Well, I don't know the exact legal ramifications, but I'm pretty sure you would be taken away. If you refuse to answer these questions, you would be treated with much more suspicion. You'd be taken away, and I don't know. I don't know what else would happen. But you've seen cases where horrendous cases of mistreatment of Muslim suspects who end up having no connection with terrorism, because they dared to stand up for their rights and say, look, I'm not going to play this game. So I think, unfortunately, especially in situations where you are dealing with police at airports or on the street, I mean, people are often scared. People don't want the trouble. So it's easier for them, especially if they really have nothing to hide, to just answer the questions and get upset about it afterwards, rather than say, I'm going to refuse the questions and potentially be arrested. So, it's in a way, it's an easy choice.
But then in the UK, we have Anjem Choudary and many other people who support him, and they've said it on TV, blatantly, that they support ISIS, and they're, recommending people to convert and to join them. How come him as a figure isn't actually taken to court or stopped in any way from influencing other people? As he's said it himself that he's an extremist, and he is with ISIS.
Well, again, this is another irony, is that you have people like that who are allowed to say what they want and do what they want, and yet, innocent people from communities that are targeted are treated with equal suspicion, which it doesn't make any sense. And it actually harms the Muslim community or Arab community or others that are targeted, because we don't want these people like Anjem Choudary to stand up and say that they represent us. They don't. But then the rest of the population in this country thinks that there is a link between what he thinks and what the community thinks, and it harms us. It doesn't harm him, it harms us. So this is a real problem. It's like, on the one hand, the government is willing to play softly with some people who are completely undesirable, but then there are also, the government is willing to treat with suspicion innocent members of the public just because of their background.
But then, because you mentioned you were stopped in the airport, has this happened to you many times?
Yes, many times, and it's always the same thing. Random check, but every question is about, why do you go to the Middle East? Well, I'm Middle Eastern. Where do you want me to go? I mean, they're really patronizing questions, and it's always to do with the Middle East. And I'm supposed to be to believe that it's random. But yes, it happens. It happens a lot. That's one of the reasons why, for example, I will not travel to the United States anymore, because the way they treat me every time I go there is so disrespectful. The moment I land there, I'm treated like a criminal, and I have to prove my innocence. And after the last time, I thought, you know what? There are lots of other countries I can go to without being treated this way, and that's what I'll do. So I haven't been in several years.
But what about the whole statement of, you are not guilty until proven guilty?
Until proven,
yeah.
So
you are innocent until proven guilty.
The saying is turned on its head. When with communities that are profiled, we are assumed to be guilty, and we have to prove our innocence. It's the other way around. And that's something I can never get my head around, because it's the opposite of what these societies stand for, and I don't see why we should be treated to a different standard.
It is, because at a young age, in schools, from reception, even nursery, I imagine, we're told, and there are many books that teach us not to judge a book by its cover, and not to stereotype. Yes, the media plays a big role in stereotyping, but then we're always told not to stereotype and to get to know someone before we actually judge them.
This is the problem with these policies, is it makes, you have these big debates in this country and others in the West about integration, for example. But how do you encourage a community to integrate when they feel alienated, when they feel discriminated against? That's not going to encourage them to integrate. They either will not be willing to integrate or will not be integrated. And then on the other hand as well, the government wants apparently to increase cooperation from the Muslim community in the fight against extremism. But why would the community cooperate with an authority that discriminates them? If you feel that you are being alienated or disenfranchised by the authorities, you're not going to approach them and say, I'm going to help. You're going to feel that they're not your friend, they're not working with you, then that you're an enemy. So it goes against the very ideas of integration and cooperation that these governments speak of.
That's true, but then the Muslim communities in the UK, can't they, speak with the government, telling them that what you're kind of doing isn't actually helping, and it's making the Muslims, more alienated than ever?
They can and they do, and this is happening more often. But as I said, again, you come back to the problem where you can tell the government this, but the government will say, we don't racially profile. I mean, goes back.
But then if you show them the statistics and be like, look, numbers don't lie.
Well, I mean, that's true, and there are efforts to try and stop it. But I think, as I said, now in the current climate where the public wants to see action, it doesn't necessarily matter whether that action is effective. The government has to be seen to be doing something. So I think when it comes to placating the majority of the public to a government that trumps the concerns of these minority communities, because they are smaller communities, that they want the majority of the public to see they're doing something. Doesn't really matter whether it's effective, but it's the seeing rather than the doing.
But then to see, for example, Anjem Choudary being removed, I think that would be more of the government actually acting than stopping random people.
Well, I mean, I don't know the particular case about Anjem Choudary, and I don't want to make a martyr out of him. He doesn't represent this debate and all the community. So I'm not too concerned about him in particular. I'm concerned about the welfare of these minority communities that are targeted as a whole.
That's true, but then we keep getting targeted for stuff that we haven't actually done and that we're actually against. Like, for example, when you were stopped, couldn't you just tell them, research my name on Google and you'll see that I'm actually against these terrorists? So, why are you stopping me?
Well, because again, you find yourself in a situation where, you've had a long flight, you're at this airport, you're not being treated particularly respectfully, and you just want to go home. And you haven't done anything wrong, so it's easier in a way to just answer these questions. Obviously, not I make my displeasure clear, but I'm not offensive about it. But sometimes it's just easier to just say, look, these are my answers, and let me go, because otherwise I don't want to spend the day apprehended and facing further questioning and suspicion because I wouldn't answer questions or because I lost my temper. So it's easy to say, right, I'm going to stamp my foot and be like, no, you're not going to ask me these questions. But in the end, you just want to go home. You don't want further trouble.
That is true. So the actual searches is just mainly in the airport.
My experiences have all been in the airport. Yeah, not on the streets, for example. But where I feel what I can do is, and what I've done since the last time, is to write about these experiences. So I don't want to spend all day on the police apprehension, but I will then go home, write an article, and say this is how we're being treated, and this is not acceptable. So I think that's my way of protest without having to spend a certain amount of time in a jail cell.
No one would want to stay in a jail cell. But then, like when we look at the UK as a whole, there are many Muslims in the UK, and the Arabs are less, but there are many Muslims here. So just to being stopped because you wear a headscarf, or because you look Arab, or because the dress you're wearing is kind of like more Muslim than anything else, it's kind of scary in a way, like to know that in the airport I may be questioned. That's kind of,
I find it particularly scary. I mean, I as I said, I got used to this treatment in America. Obviously in Israel as well, I was treated that way. But in Britain, I'm a British citizen, and to be treated that way, and the first time it happened to me in Britain was the last time I traveled. I came here, I went to visit my family in Jordan, and I came back, and me and my brother were treated this way. And to be treated that way in my own country, in a country where I'm a citizen, that really was very shocking for me, because you feel momentarily that you are not as much a part of this country as you think you are, that the authorities that are supposed to represent you view you as different. And I found that particularly upsetting, because this is my country and I should have the same rights as everyone else.
But then isn't this going to make the Muslim community and Arab community act differently, or people are just going to get used to it, shrug it off, be displeased afterwards, but then that's it?
Well, there are some people will feel that yes, this is something that we have to just accept, but then there are a lot of people who are getting increasingly angry by this and saying, well, this is not something we should accept. And when I shared my experience with other Arabs and Muslims, there was a feeling that this is getting worse. The situation is getting worse, and there was a lot of indignation about that. I think by and large, people that I speak to who say that given the circumstances, racial profiling is justified, they tend to be people who come from communities who will never be racially profiled. So it's very easy for them to say that. But if you're put in that situation, the embarrassment, the rudeness, the whole experience of feeling different, in your own country, for example, this is a horrible experience. And I doubt if those people were in that situation, they would be so accepting.
But why would the police be rude if they're trying to,
It's their whole tone. It's they talk down to you. They don't use swear words, for example, but it's the whole tone that you are being questioned, and they talk. It's very stern, and they talk down to you. And when I was with my brother and we were being questioned, I mean, he just asked in a perfectly normal tone. He was like, is there a problem? And the police officer just snapped at him. He was like, did I say there was a problem? And he was like, I'm just asking. It's all right to ask. And then my brother was being bollocked for daring to ask a very normal question, is there a problem? This is rude. It's not necessary.
So basically
we already know we're being racially profiled. At least be polite about it.
So we shouldn't actually ask them any questions.
Exactly. Just, it's...
just answer the questions and move on.
Yeah.
But then with your story that you shared, you mentioned that you got stopped twice and it was just a few steps.
Yeah, so I got stopped literally the distance from where I am to you. They gave me back my passport. As I walked, someone else asked for my passport again, and I said, your colleague just asked for it, and she was like, yeah, I know. They were just screwing with me. I mean, it was just to get a rise out of me, and this is what really upset me, was that to me this was gratuitous. There was no reason for it. She'd seen that I'd given my passport, I answered my questions, and I was fine. I wasn't ISIS, and then a few steps down the line, I was suddenly on the questioning again. I mean, it's this whole experience that people who talk about the justification for racial profiling, that's what they don't realize. It's you feel that so much of it is unnecessary and gratuitous that it's really very insulting and unnecessary.
But how can you justify it?
You can't justify it. I don't believe it's justified. Morally, it's not justified. It doesn't work strategically. It's a waste of resources if you're trying to tackle extremism. You are throwing the net really wide and not using those resources effectively. So in no way does it work. I think it's a publicity stunt to show that the government's doing something, to an electorate that is just inherently suspicious. They'll feel better about seeing brown people being questioned. It's a PR ploy rather than an actual strategic and effective policy.
But then, do you think that in other Arab countries, they tend to, racially profile people?
I don't know, because I'm an Arab. So, I used to get a lot of trouble when I go to Arab countries and they'd ask where I'm from. I'd give them my British passport, and when they'd ask originally where I'm from, I'd say Palestinian. I would get all sorts of problems from that. So I stopped saying that. But I don't know if they racially profile, because I'm from that race. So I've never been racially profiled. I've been given problems because I'm Palestinian, which I think is a big shame. But certainly, I will guarantee you that white people are not going to be profiled in Arab countries the way Arabs are profiled in the West.
Why is that, though?
I mean, you'll have to ask the Arab authorities why they don't do it. I don't think they should do it. This shouldn't be like a tit for tat thing that we get trouble in the West, so we're going to give them trouble. The solution should be to stop racially profiling, not to increase it and say, well, if you profile me, I'm going to profile you. So I think it's a good thing that Westerners are not racially profiled in the Arab world. I just wish the West would grant us the same respect.
No, of course, it's not, you hit me, I hit you, so that's not the situation. But then, when I went to Kuwait, we were kind of stopped for over 5 hours because my sister's passport mentioned that she was born in Lebanon, whereas, all of us were born in the UK. So for her, she had to wait for 5 hours just for them to make sure that her passport is real and it's not a fake one.
This is the irony, is that we are treated with suspicion in the West, and then we are treated with suspicion within the Arab world if we're not from the right country, for example.
That's the situation we have.
Yes, and this is really the tragedy in our own region, is that we view ourselves with suspicion, and we're viewed with suspicion in the West. So it's this needs some fundamental change in the Arab world, where I as an Arab should feel that I can travel in the Arab world and be treated with respect, and unfortunately that's not the case. Now, when I travel to Arab countries and I'm asked, they look at my British passport and they ask where I'm originally from, I insist I'm British because I'll be treated better. This is the real tragedy.
Just stay British. That's the best way. Stay British,
yeah.
Best way to go.
Imagine I have to hide my Arab heritage in the Arab world. It's very sad.
That is really sad, actually, when thinking about it, because when you go to the Arab countries, if you are to mention that you're British, you'll get treated better.
Yeah.
And then in the UK, where you believe you're British,
yeah.
And because you've been born and bred here and everything else, but then you're not actually treated the same because of the religion you follow or because of your actual heritage.
And when I was young, I like an idiot, when they'd ask where I'm originally from, I'd proudly, I'm Palestinian, and then I'd wait and then get questioned, and I felt like a fool. I was like, great, I have to hide the fact that I'm an Arab in an Arab country.
But then do you think that would actually affect people's identities?
Not really. It didn't affect my identity, but it upset me that I had to hide it in my own region. This was very upsetting, but no, it shouldn't affect one's identity.
It shouldn't, but then sometimes, when we are asked, Arabs mainly, when we're asked where we're from, and we're to say British or London, for example, because you would have been born and bred there, people would be like, no, where are you from? Expecting you to say another country. And when you insist on that, they think you're a fool for not actually answering. Yeah,
but unfortunately, we are forced to give these answers because we know very well that if we tell them, we're going to be, we're going to have to wait and be, subjected to questioning and stuff. So if these authorities have a problem with that, they should change their policies. They should at least treat our own people with respect, just as well as they treat Westerners. Westerners would never have these problems in the Arab world, but we do. So they have to change that. They have to make us feel that we can say we are from a specific Arab country and not face any problems.
Do you think this goes back to the whole, colonization, or the whole aspect of, the whites being the upper class and then, the Asians and Arabs being middle and then the blacks being the third?
Yeah, quite possibly. If you look, there is certainly a sense in many fields that, West is best, and I know, for example, from Arabs who worked in Arab organizations where they would complain that if there was a Westerner and an Arab with the same job title, the Westerner would be paid more. So this is a real problem. I mean, that we have an inferiority complex. So it makes it very difficult. If we want to be treated with respect, we have to treat each other with respect. We're not inferior, and as long as we're treated as inferiors by our own authorities, this makes the job much harder. We have to get respect from the West, but also from our own governments.
That's actually really true, because a few years back there was this actual article in the Metro, I believe it was, where a British citizen, his name, he had an English name, however, he is, Asian, applied for a job in Dubai, and he got the job, and, with a really high pay, but then when they saw him, they kind of like refused his application because he wasn't English, like white. And he actually then took them to court, but then I don't know if he won or not. But then that is the situation, what we Arabs actually face in, the Arab world and the West, that, if even when we apply here for jobs, we're not really likely to get a job just like a white person would.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, there is a friend of mine who is half Japanese, half Arab. And but their surname, although their dad is Arab, their surname is Japanese. And I asked, how come you have the Japanese surname? And they said, well, because since I moved to London, it was easier to get work with a Japanese surname. So that's the fact of life.
It's just by the name, basically.
Just by the name. I mean, they feel that they are not at all, ashamed of their Arab heritage, but simply to get work, it was easier to have a Japanese surname.
Because you mentioning that reminded me that there was actually a statistic saying that many people tend to change their name just to get a job, which is kind of like, it's a shame, because even though we say it may not affect our identity, but at the end of the day, your name is something big.
Yes.
So for you to change it it's really...
Yeah, it's sad. And I hope that the increased efforts in this country and others to highlight the discrimination that takes place, I hope that will bear fruit, because there have been some very important examples and studies done showing that having an Arab or Muslim sounding name does directly affect your job prospects. So I hope that highlighting this will show that something needs to be done, and that will eventually lead to action against these kind of practices.
But then they are highlighted. The fact that we're getting reports on it, we're seeing statistics, many people are, doing something about it in a way, but then the government is just putting it to a side.
Well, it's not. It's not directly an issue of government here. This is an issue of employers. It's employers who choose whether they want to hire someone. So this doesn't really have anything to do with the government. The problem, the problem with this is, again, it's similar to the issue of racial profiling. Is employers will never admit that they didn't hire you because of your name or your background. So that's difficult to prove. But there are increased efforts by Muslim organizations in this country, for example, to educate people in the community about their employment rights, to be able to better assess whether they're being discriminated against and how best to deal with that discrimination based on what type of discrimination they're facing. So that the education process is improving, and that's fundamentally, that's where it should start. That knowing your rights and knowing how to pursue those rights. But as I said, it's difficult because employers will often not say directly, yes, we are discriminating because of your background. But that's why these kind of examples where the same person will apply to the same company with two different surnames, and you'll see the difference. The one will get an interview and one won't. Those are important, because then it's very difficult for that employer to deny that that's the reason that they didn't give them the interview. So I think these dual campaigns of doing these kind of tests and also educating the communities as to what they can do about it, I think those eventually will force employers to treat people fairly.
So like if I was to go to a company and apply with my actual name and then with a more English name, and I get the actual job with the English name, that would kind of be something I can take to court.
Yes, well, I mean, it's been done. These studies have been done where you'd send applications to the same company and they would give an interview to the English sounding name and not to the Arab or Muslim sounding name. So these have been done. And yes, I mean, I think that in court that would be very difficult for the employer to say, well, that had nothing to do with race or background, if you had the same CV but with a different surname. So yeah, I think that could go a long way. But I think education is key to this. That people have to know what they can do about it. Also, I think in tandem with that is they should I would encourage people, if they're going to make those accusations, to feel quite confident that that is the case. I mean, if you apply and you don't get a job, don't necessarily think it's because you were targeted because of your background. But make sure that if you make that accusation, that you have a good case to make it. And I think that's part of the education process. Know your rights, know when to complain and how to complain. And I think that will improve the situation in time.
Going back to the racial profiling, in the UK, it was mainly after 9/11 that the security, became more. It increased a lot when we go to the airports, for example. In Heathrow, we'd have to be taking everything off, even our shoes, and putting them. Do you think that actually has benefited, the country?
No. Look. In all this time that racial profiling has been in place, is there less terrorism? No. I mean, the threat level's increased. Exactly. It doesn't work, and it's not been working for such a long time that it just defies logic that that the government wouldn't realize, well, we're doing something wrong here. Of course they're doing something wrong. They're not targeting the right people, and that's why the threat level keeps increasing. But as I said, unfortunately, it's more about being seen to be doing something. But effectively on the ground that doesn't change the threat level, because they're not targeting the right people.
But then when we're to look at the security that's actually taking place, you're saying that it's more of something that we're seeing happening. And to be honest, when I see a lot of police and stuff in Heathrow, I feel more safe. But then when they tend to stop people, whoever they are, and to be honest, I've never seen them stop a white person, but when they stop someone, you kind of do feel safe in a way. But then you question, why are they stopping this person?
Well, that's exactly my point. So at an airport, as you said, people feel safe if they see a big police presence and they're questioning people. They feel safe. It doesn't matter. They won't stop to think whether that person should be questioned, but they see that person being questioned and justice is being done. It's perception, and that's what the public wants to see. And that's part. I think what drives this racial profiling is perception. That if they go to airports and they don't see anyone being questioned, people might say, well, what is this lack security? We're not being safeguarded. So it's perception.
But then if before everything happened with the Middle East, like ISIS and stuff, it was just mainly the police being there, and randomly, and it was really random checks, because I did see white people then when you would just be leaving and they would stop people. That was really random. But then before, it was just mainly seeing them, not just them stopping. That makes you kind of feel safe, even though it may not actually be the case. Yeah. It may not actually help, but just them being there, it's just
well, if
changes.
you look at now with the fight against ISIS, all the talk is about not just the threat of ISIS in the region, but the threat that it could pose in the West. So governments feel that they have to be showing the public that they're doing something because of this threat perception. So this is why now we've gone beyond just having a police presence to police stopping people and questioning them. That people need to feel that in this given this threat, that it's sometimes portrayed almost as some existential threat to the West, that something is being done.
But then is ISIS actually a threat to the West? Because they haven't actually mentioned, ISIS hasn't mentioned that it's going to be attacking the West anytime soon. They've mentioned a lot of the Arabian countries.
Well, they've threatened any country that's part of the coalition involved in fighting them. So they have threatened them. But I mean, if you look at the threat ISIS poses to the region compared to the West, it's night and day. You can't compare. So I think part of it in the West is obviously preemptive. You don't want to be lax and then there'll be some major terrorist incident. That's obviously not a solution. But also I think partly there's an idea of scaremongering, that they want to keep people scared so that governments can pursue agendas such as eavesdropping, such as the racial profiling, things like that. So they can pursue policies that the public won't question because it's seen as in the greater good. So there's an issue of that, and also the other avenue. But
then with the whole thing of scared, okay, many people are scared, and being a Muslim and an Arab, sometimes when seeing the stereotypical look of a terrorist, I do get scared, which is something I have to work on. But then that's something else.
What's the stereotypical look of a terrorist?
It's the ones that you mainly see on TV, the ISIS type of looking people, Okay, which I'm kind of being racist to myself. But then you do get that, and then you start questioning how powerful the media is, which it really is powerful. But then for eavesdropping and for, CCTV to be around, many people are still against that, regardless of security. No one would want cameras
No, the public, the reason for public opposition to the prevalence of CCTV cameras is they don't know what happens to that information. They don't know who receives it. They don't know who gives it to who. It's the not knowing. It's the very justified fear that governments abuse the right to, in terms of privacy and human rights. So that's what the opposition is that they don't know what happens to that information and how it's used. But I think, look, one example of the issue of racial profiling, for example, I had a conversation with someone who said that an English person, who said that racial profiling was justified because, she felt safer. So then I asked her, I said, okay, do you support the police stopping and searching black people on the street? She's like, no, of course not. I said, well, what's the difference? I mean, they're stopping a Muslim in an airport, randomly, but they're choosing to stop them because they're Muslim. And they're choosing to stop a black person on the street because they're black. Why are you opposed to that, but not that? It's the same thing. They are being profiled. So
it is the same thing, but maybe because the black race has been targeted a lot because of their skin color, that she feels that, that shouldn't actually happen. And because...
Well, Muslims and Arabs are targeted a lot for their skin color, so...
That's true, but then people can argue, which of course I'm against, but people can argue that because the Muslims are more in the media and that they're, terrorists, which, hurts me to say, but they'll just use that against, saying that it's fine.
They'll
justify it that way.
In countries such as Britain, where we are supposed to be all equal under the law, that we should be treated equally. And this is not
I'm with you on that. Of course we should all be treated equally, but then we know however much, we may be treated equally, we're not. At the end of the day, we're not.
If people are worried about their safety, they should consider that if there are, in a crowd of people, if there are one or two people acting suspiciously and the authorities target them, rather than targeting the entire crowd, what's the more effective policy? You're likely to miss the extremists. If you are treating a whole community with suspicion, you may miss the particular people that are actually behaving suspiciously. Better than to look specifically at suspicious behavior and target those people. It's logically a more effective policy.
No, I agree. And even there was a report that came out in 2006, how they stopped over 11 terrorist attacks, stopped it before happening. But then, the 7/7 situation just, took place, which kind of put a question mark, meaning how come you were able to stop all of the others but not this? But the thing is, with Britain and its security, it knows when people are acting weird, with the whole eavesdropping, with the whole cameras and everything. They know who's, doing something wrong and who isn't. So in that way, can't they just use those methods instead of just stopping random people?
Well, look, I don't think we're in a situation to know how much the government knows, but I think if you are throwing the net very widely, what you think you might know might not be the case. And if you're going to be then inundated with potential information because you're suspecting everyone, then you may miss very real... a lot of the times when these atrocities happen, it turns out afterwards that there were, alarm bells ringing, but they didn't act on them. And I think it's easier to act on those alarm bells if your policy is targeted rather than saying everyone in this community could be a suspect. And then you have to look at all this information and everything and sift through all this information. You could miss the very real warning signs that something is about to happen.
But then with terrorism, when thinking about it, there have been many terrorist attacks which are not by Muslims, which are not by Arabs. But why do you think we're still the ones targeted mainly?
It's, there are many reasons. The depiction of Arabs and Muslims in Hollywood, in the media, among far-right groups or political groups, the fact that there is so much, there are so many problems in the Arab and Muslim world, very violent conflicts, all these things come together to give a sense of, that we are inherently suspect or violent or backward, So there are all these different things, either, very real conflicts on the ground or people with agendas to scapegoat people from our communities. It's a very ingrained perception.
But then in Hollywood, when we see them, filming Muslims taking over a plane, hijacking a plane, for example, and then them holding the Quran. I feel very offended by that. Do you think we can do something against it? Because the way they're picturing Muslims, all of them, because the thing is, the Muslim terrorists, yes, there is, but they're very, minute in comparison to the whole, Muslim community around the world.
Yeah, well, look, more is being done. I mean, if you compare, in my lifetime, for example, the action films in the 1980s, where you'd see these things, no one batted an eyelid about that. But there really is now, when there are films or TV programs that portray this, there is more of an outcry today. There was nothing in the 80s. And if you look, there was a very interesting a documentary I watched called Real Bad Arabs by Jack Shaheen. He's an American Arab, where he looked at Hollywood portrayals of Arabs from dating back 100 years. And you see what an ingrained perception it was even back then. Even in Disney movies, in children's cartoon movies, you'd see horrendous stereotypes, which went unchallenged. And now in this day and age, people are challenging. Even non-Muslims and non-Arabs are saying, look, this is not right. So this is changing. So I think as long as the trend is there, we hopefully would see less of these gratuitous stereotypes of these communities.
You mentioned even in Disney.
Yeah, in Disney cartoons. I mean, there were examples in the documentary where you'd have horrendous stereotypes that I guess we were kids at the time, we wouldn't think of. But we watch it now.
Like I'm trying to recall myself
Yeah, I mean, in Aladdin and films like that, there would be things like songs sung or
the way, because I'm thinking when we look at the princesses, the way Jasmine is dressed in comparison to the other princesses.
Well, there was apparently also a song that was sung in the film where the lyrics was so offensive. But that, I guess as kids you wouldn't think about it. But when I watched the documentary, I was like, how did they allow this? This is utter racism. And again, nothing was questioned. But today, I can tell you, if those lyrics were in a Disney movie today, there would be an outcry.
But then they're still selling the same Disney films, no? This cartoon, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have a ban on these films, certainly in the West.
But then, Baba Black Sheep, the nursery rhyme, they've banned that. We're not allowed to sing it anymore because apparently it's racist. So if you're saying that, the Disney film was...
Okay, well, there you go. Baba Black Sheep, we all used to sing it when we were kids, and now you're saying it's banned. I don't know. I haven't sung Baba Black Sheep in a long time. But, hopefully there is certainly a greater sensitivity now. Of course, there are many, many examples where there is insensitivity, but there's a greater sensitivity now than there used to be. A lot of that is because there are bigger communities in the West of Arabs and Muslims who are there to say, well, hold on, why are we being depicted like this? So that's changing. I think there's obviously problems, but compared to the recent history, that's changing, and I think it will be far tougher for film studios to make such gratuitous stereotypes of these people without there being an outcry.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sharif, and thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface. See you next time.